There's a book about how to expect what you're expecting, but there's no book on how to raise teenage kids.
Every step, every decision that Andy and I had to make together was like rebuilding the wheel, like finding the right educational consultant, deciding which program was the best fit for her. But we made it through, and she made it through, and here we are.
Take a girl and a guy, and they fall madly in love and form a family. Sprinkle in some counseling degrees and a doctorate, a dream of transforming relationships as we know it. And 20 years later, we give you power couple Dr. Ray and Jean Ketkodian. And this is their podcast, Couples Synergy.
Welcome back to another episode of Couples Synergy with Dr. Ray and Jean. Hi, I'm Dr. Ray.
And I'm Jean, and this is our podcast about love, marriage, and relationships.
Please check us out online at couplesynergy.com or on Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram at Couples Synergy. And please subscribe to our podcast, leave us a review, or send us any suggestions on topics you'd like to hear more about. And now on to Couples Synergy, an in-depth look at love, marriage, and relationships, where we bring you our experience helping thousands of couples transform their relationships for over 25 years.
Every day we get to hear intimate details about a couple's celebrations, disappointments, and everyday challenges. We've often wished these stories were shared because we know we are more similar than different. So we've created not only an avenue we can hear about people's intimate lives, but an atmosphere where people come over to our home saloon, pour a drink, and share their stories.
People like today's guests, Andy and Lori Goldstrom. They are the founders of Parents Journey. They provide coaching services and a variety of other resources to help parents better navigate the challenges of raising children today. Together, they host the Wilderness Therapy and Residential Treatment Center Journey podcast. Thank you for being on our podcast today, Andy and Lori. We are really looking forward to talking about this topic today.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us. And we got our dog with us.
I see you got your dog, and we.
She's a little. She's used to having Lori around, and so came down to our basement for attention. She seems to be okay now.
We have two puppies that are 5 months old, and right now they are behaving. So we are keeping our fingers crossed.
We actually got the first one in February, and he really needed a companion. So we went, actually yesterday, we drove 15 hours to go pick up his brother. And they look like twins. We have both of them here now.
Wow.
Yeah. They're
fun.
super cute.
Exciting.
Yeah, that's fun.
Yeah, this one here is sleeping on the bar stool next to me here. So
15 hours is a commitment, huh?
Oh, yeah, it sure is. It sure is. So, tell us a little bit about yourselves and, kind of what got you to start Parents Journey.
You want
me to start?
Go
Okay. Well, we started it during COVID when everybody was home, and we were sort of finding a new family dynamic here, and had a history with one of our kids of needing more than we had been able to provide her in terms of mental health assistance locally with a psychiatrist and a therapist and tutors and all the things you do. And it wasn't enough. So we had a route, which we can get to in a moment. But at the beginning of COVID, when everybody was trying to find what they were going to do to stay busy, long days stuck at home, Andy was like, we went through this journey in so many ways alone. We had professional help, but you don't have peer support other than people who you lean on, but they don't really understand what you're going through because they haven't been through it. And he said, I think we can provide something to people who are going through this and don't know where to turn, how to find peers or how to find support from people who went through the same experience. So that's where the podcast originated. But then Andy took it a step further, as he'll get into, with getting certified to be a parent coach. Because when we were going through this process with our daughter, we had a parent coach through the program that she was at, one of the programs that she was at, in addition to therapist. And he was really moved by that and decided that he wanted to get certified and do that on the side. And now he's actually doing it more than on the side. And but I'll let him get into more of that when he talks. Do you want
That's
to
really similar to how we started our podcast, where couples would ask us, are we normal? And so we decided to interview couples about their relationship. So can you guys start and share about how you guys met?
Do you want me to take that too? Or you
No,
want-
I got it. We'll
Okay.
take turns.
Okay.
We met at a wedding and we just celebrated our 30th wedding anniversary. Actually, we met at the
Wonderful.
wedding, and I was the best man, and obviously on the groom side, and she was friendly with people on the bride side, and they both kind of organized it to match us up because both of us were single at the time, and so we were looking for each other when we went to the wedding, and had a good time dancing and enjoying each other's company, and realized that we had some similar values. And I was on a management program with a company and was moving to different parts of the country for between 6 months and a year at a time. So it ended up that we started dating long distance. She in Boston, and I was as far at one point out in Los Angeles. And every 6 weeks we would visit each other for a long weekend or a week or whatever. And we made it work. And eventually, the first time we lived in a city together was when we were engaged.
Wow. So how long did you guys have that long distance relationship?
About a year.
A little over a year.
Mm.
And what was it about each other that you fell in love with?
Ooh, good question. I guess back then I would say it was he has an unusual sense of humor. And back then it was very endearing. 30 years later, sometimes I'm like, again,
Dad jokes.
he's got a lot of dad jokes, a lot of corny jokes. I'm like, oh. But I don't, we just clicked. People say you just click, and we just clicked. I fell in love with his drive. I fell in love with his commitment to things he was doing. He goes all in a very, very significant way when he commits to something. Like I said, his sense of humor, he's super smart. And that was also very attractive to me, to have a partner that was bright, had varied interests. He liked sports, which I like as well. And when you can make it work long distance from the beginning, I don't know. I feel like that really says something about your commitment to one another. And we still had an engagement, a half a year, 8 months or so engagement when we were then living together. When we finally did get engaged, and we were in the same city. But it was quite a year and a half, I'd say, from when I first met him.
And what was it about her?
Oh, it's easy. She's beautiful, and she's maintained it. So there's a spark to her, and she's vivacious and engaging and loving, and it was kind of easy to see it from the very beginning. And I feel fortunate that that we've been able to share our life's partnership since then. We've been married far longer than we in our lives than we lived as single people at this point, and so we certainly have established a bond based upon all the happiness we've had, but also working through some of the challenges, for sure.
And we just celebrated our 25th.
Congrats.
This past,
Congratulations.
Thank you. This past Valentine's Day. And you think about it, it's like 25 years, right? 30 years being with, a partner. There's some significance behind that,
For sure.
I just had my 60th birthday, and we had our 30th anniversary the next month, and I'm like, it's literally been half my life now.
Mhm.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Mhm.
Happy birthday.
Thank you.
I'd
Did
like
you
to
guys have
point-
an engagement story?
Do we have an engagement story? Well, he was a visit. I was in Boston, as he mentioned, and at that point he was in Atlanta. So we kind of joked that we were at least in the same time zone once he finally got to the East Coast. He had been on the West Coast, as you mentioned. But he came up to Boston for a weekend and proposed to me in the Boston Public Garden. If you know Boston at all, with the swan boats, where the swan boats are, that area, which is one of my favorite places in the city of Boston, and proposed to me there. in the fall.
Very nice. Very nice. And how many kids do you guys have?
2 adult women, young ladies, and the one that Lori was referencing is the younger child, the one who went to wilderness therapy and then residential treatment, and that was 5 or 6 years ago now.
What was it like adjusting to becoming parents?
Well, we have a fun story. Lori doesn't like me to repeat it, but I'm going to. She's, because of the way I described her, she's always been very motherly and had maternal instincts. I did not have paternal instincts at the same level, and so she was interested at age 30 or shortly thereafter of wanting to start a family, and I didn't know whether I was ready or not. There's part of my parents' journey coaching is, there's a book about how to expect what you're expecting, but there's no book on how to raise teenage kids, that's consistent in a proper way. There's no manual. So she was asking me to want to get started not long after we got married, because we wanted to have a second child, at some point, and make sure that we weren't too old as parents and that we're minimizing any risk and all the rest. And so after a while, to frankly satisfy her need, and I got creative, and maybe my sense of humor a little bit, but I told her, maybe as a starting point, we can get a goldfish and see how we could take care of that. And believe it or not, she bit. She went out and got a goldfish to say, if this is a first step, I'll play. And unfortunately, she killed the goldfish in the first day because she didn't acclimate the water in the bag.
I never had a fish before.
She just put it in the bowl. So I'm like, how are we going to take care of any kids and be able to raise that and change a diaper and give a bottle? We can't even take care of a goldfish.
You killed it right from the start, right?
I remember having that feeling though,
Yeah.
when I became a mom and going like, well, all my pets have died, so I could be in trouble with this one.
Yeah. But we had, and the good news was, it wasn't too much longer that we did have our first child in 1995. And, and we had, we were fortunate in that we had some help, a baby nurse and some friends and family and other support around us to help us make it work like most parents do. And, we had the sleepless nights. We had the, what do you do? What do you do as parents when you want to start reading to them or want to start, letting them sleep and find their, allow them to comfort themselves as opposed to coming to the rescue all the time. And that doesn't change throughout their childhood, frankly. You have to find that balance.
Did you guys want to talk a little bit about the challenges that you were facing with your youngest daughter and kind of how that progressed into starting Parents Journey?
Go for it.
Sure. So our younger daughter she has ADHD, which, wasn't really the root of her problems, but she had also been tested multiple times, and we uncovered that she had very poor working memory, which is your short-term memory.
Mm-hmm.
And she was falling behind in school. When she hit maybe middle school, she was starting to fall behind in school. She couldn't keep up with the other kids. We also had a move to Florida, a brief move to Florida, which was very hard for her, leaving behind 13 years of her childhood in Atlanta. We turned around and came back a few years later, but it was very, very hard for her, but she was just falling behind and couldn't keep up with things. And as she progressed through middle school and then the return to Atlanta, it just got worse. And her anxiety was very, very high. She was seeing, as I mentioned, a psychiatrist and a therapist, and she had tutors. I was doing everything that I knew to do and that I was getting guidance from professionals what to do. And it just wasn't enough. I mean, an hour a week of therapy and a once a month psychiatry appointment to look at her meds, it wasn't enough. She was spiraling. She was starting to make bad choices. She was starting to hang out with with the wrong kids. She was starting to smoke pot, you know, at, I don't know, maybe 16 or 16, hanging out in abandoned homes with friends and just stuff that isn't what I would have raised my kid to do. Right. So we were losing control basically. And I no longer, you know, knew what to do. Andy and I, you know, were trying to pull from all resources we could. And we weren't making any headway. Finally, the pediatrician put me in touch with another mom of another patient of hers whose child had different issues, but a similar kind of experience where they had been spiraling. And we found out about this, like I called it the underworld at the time, because I had no familiarity at all. I'm like, all of this exists and I never heard of any of it before. You know, wilderness therapy was like a 6 to 8 week intensive treatment where you're literally removed from civilization. You're out in the woods, or you're somewhere else where you have only contact through like a letter or email that's printed and given to you on paper, and you have no social media, of course, and it's just you're completely removed. It's basically, they call it a reset button. Mm-hmm. So it takes the child out of what is triggering them. All of these things that she was spiraling from, which she couldn't really identify, and removed her from further spiraling, basically, to kind of give her a reset, and see how she could start to, you know, believe in herself again, and see that there were other pathways, and, you know, obviously very intensive therapy, but it's 24/7. You basically send your child away. But Andy and I reached this point where we didn't know what else to do. And we felt like her life was at risk, and we were fighting constantly at home because I was trying to, you know, hover over her because I didn't know what else to do to protect her. And it wasn't helping. But if I stepped back and just let her like find her own path, she was going down the drain. So we sent her away, and she did this intensive program, and we had a educational consultant that we had hired here in the Atlanta area that investigated the programs, and there's many of them out there. And what we saw as priorities for Audrey and her personality and her, you know, various things that we felt were important in making the proper selection for her. This person reached out to the psychiatrist and the therapist and the school counselor, and like really did all of her homework to put the pieces together to try to find the right fit for Audrey. And it was January, so it was cold out. And while they have all kinds of equipment for people to go live in the mountains in cold weather in the winter, we have a child who had some like joint problems, and she has fibromyalgia. So we didn't want the cold weather to be a factor in her focusing on her mental health. We wanted her to focus exclusively on getting well psychologically and not worry about physically. So we sent her to a warm weather climate for her program in Hawaii. What kid isn't going to do that, right? She was on the Big Island and in a program out there, which was very beneficial for her. And then we continued with the educational consultant to find out what the next step would be. And what happens with these children is most of them continue on to a longer term program after that, where they start to reintegrate into society with still significant supervision, but some more adulting goes on. When Audrey was at this point over 18. So more adulting goes on. Kids get jobs, kids get internships, or some kids take college classes if that's what they are in line to do. And that we sent her to that follow-up program in Oregon. But it was very hard for Andy and I because, you know, our kid and probably more so me because I'm the mama bear. But it was hard for us as a couple. It was hard for each of us as a parent to have her gone for that long. We were able to visit her for like a parents' weekend, but honestly, like that's not a lot of time when you're used to having your kid at home with you. But that is what was necessary to try to stop the spiral, basically, and get her intense psychological treatment. And, you know, every step, every decision that Andy and I had to make together was like redoing building the wheel, like, finding the right educational consultant, deciding which program was the best fit for her, getting her to the program, then deciding on the next program, getting her to that program, how we were going to do that. There was just so much that we had to go through as a couple, in talking through these choices and the decisions, and our different parenting styles that came into play, of course, in therapy regularly, because we do have very different parenting styles, and definitely both of them contributed in different ways to where Audrey was, as well as her learning disabilities and other things. So it was very, very challenging, but we made it through, and she made it through, and here we are. Been married for 30 years, as we said, and she, made it through all her treatment, and is, she has her ups and downs still, but not like that.
Bring us back to, there's a problem in 5th grade. She doesn't get into this thing that really feels helpful till she's 16 or 17. And you guys are struggling for a good 10 years, because I think there's a lot of parents in those places. And I think when we're there, it becomes very reactive. Like, well, there's this problem, I'm trying to solve that, or it's all piecemeal. And talk about the challenges you guys went through as a couple, and your different parenting styles, and what you know now that you didn't know back then that was part of your guys' journey.
Sure. Okay, if I take this.
Yeah, please.
So I'll start backwards to forwards. In what we know now, and we learned from Audrey, is that when we started being concerned about her mental health, we started losing attunement to her feelings and what she was going through, and putting ourselves in her shoes, because it was so foreign to us. We were achievers as kids, and we never had a kid with mental illness, and weren't exposed to a lot of kids with challenges like that. And so Lori Lori interviewed Audrey on one of the podcast episodes that happens to be the most popular one that was ever downloaded, because it was very genuine. And Audrey basically said, I never felt, while I was going through this, I know you were trying to do your best to protect me and guide me and all the rest, and it wasn't working, but I really felt like you weren't hearing me. You really didn't understand me. And all you needed to do was kind of step back and listen a little bit more, as opposed to being so apprehensive. And that was a big lesson for us, because Audrey was not trying to be a bad kid with some of the mischief she was getting into. She was just trying to find her way and cope, and find ways to feel better about herself and her circumstance. And sometimes it was getting high. Sometimes it was just getting out of the house, even if it was the wrong time of day. Sometimes it was just being resistant because she didn't like being told what to do, at the time. And so, that's a lesson I've carried forward into my coaching business, for sure, in making sure that parents are attuned to their child from the beginning, and actually giving kids more empowerment, as opposed to parents just dictating, which might have been more common a couple generations ago, but it doesn't work nearly as well now. And then the whole parent coaching business or not the parent coaching business, our relationship as husband and wife was strained. I was an entrepreneur who had a good business career and what that meant was, our agreement was, she was primarily the parent at home, and I'd be working long hours or traveling. There was a point around that time that Audrey started spiraling. I was actually traveling overseas sometimes for a week or two at a time. And based upon my upbringing and my mental makeup, I'm kind of a, just suck it up and get it done kind of guy, kind of person. And I wasn't as empathetic as I needed to be. And I would come back after a week or two and see the kids spiraling, and seeing how loving but how tolerant Lori was at times. And it would be disturbing or troubling for me, because I'm like, why is Audrey, and why is our older daughter, why are they not doing what they're supposed to do as kids for the age appropriate stuff? Why are they challenging us in the way that they are? And And so when we got we needed, when we sent Audrey away or gave her the gift of, as we call it, we realized it wasn't just about her getting better, it was about us getting better. And the parent coaching really, I don't think it saved our marriage because we had enough of a bond and enough value system to want to stay together for sure. But it strained it, and we needed to kind of grieve about not having a child who was taking the path that we thought she would ultimately take and be happy and independent. We needed to forgive each other because we were just doing our best with the parenting situation we had. And we needed to learn how to communicate with Audrey while she was away, and then differently when she came back, so that we didn't facilitate her behavior reverting. And so that parent coaching really helped us quite a bit. And it inspired me, as Lori said, to start the podcast to help other parents, but also to, and then based upon the feedback that was so positive there, it inspired me to actually become a parent coach. And it wasn't that big a leap for me, because as a business person, I was kind of the thing that differentiated me was not my good looks. You could see I'm a bald guy. And it wasn't me being a real salesy kind of person. It was really about developing people and keeping commitments. And so, I learned I got specifically trained and certified by a couple of national organizations to allow me to facilitate that in a family setting as opposed to a business setting.
I think it's, and you guys could probably attest to this, that it's pretty natural for parents going through that to turn on each other, right? And to go through feelings of being a failure or failing and feeling lost and confused. What was pivotal in helping the two of you move out of that and move towards these resources and be on the same page in utilizing these resources? Because I think a lot of parents would feel, if they are not on the same page, that sending their child away would mean admitting defeat in some way, or that we're not able to do it ourselves, right?
I don't know. We didn't really look at it as admitting defeat. We saw it as a gift, as Andy just said. We were fortunate that we had that opportunity, that we could find these programs that we didn't even know about, that were geared for these kinds of kids. So we really never looked at it as failure. I mean, her mental health issues were not something we created technically. I mean, the fact that she had poor short-term memory, which sort of started her spiral, wasn't something that we did that created that. And so we didn't really think of this as a failure. Could we have done different things as parents, and maybe she would have had not spiraled as far? Yes, possibly. If I, treated her differently, or if he was more engaged, or whatever it might have been, maybe things might have been different. But we had another child that we parented the same way, and she didn't have those issues. So we just didn't think of it as a failure. We really looked at it as unfortunate, and scary as all what. But we were very lucky that we found opportunities to try to help her, and that we could take advantage of them, which was really key in turning that around. So we didn't really blame each other. I mean, there were moments early in therapy where we might have placed more blame on the other for whatever those items were, but we had the quality of the therapy that we received and that she received, and the coaching was exceptional. I mean, it was just exceptional, and it helped us to see what we needed to do to get to a better place when she got through the programs. And we were able to do that because it meant
when you talk about that quality, are you talking about once she was in those residential programs, when she went away?
When she went away,
prior to that, I think
sorry.
prior to that, you guys had talked about, and we see this as well, that the resources in everyday life, they're just not there.
Right.
And I think teachers
So,
want to blame parents, and parents want to blame each other, and therapists want to blame whoever. It's like that's kind of human nature, right? And we deal with the same thing when we have a couple come in. That's the first thing they're doing is blaming their partner. That's never part of the solution, which you guys know now, which you looking back you can say no, that's not where it's at all. But I think initially when you feel that sense of powerlessness, of something's going on that doesn't feel good and can potentially be dangerous, and that powerlessness.
Yeah.
What do you think, if you have any ideas of how things could be better before they get to this place? And maybe it's because we just live so non-organically.
yeah, I'm glad she remembers it in a more positive way than I do in some ways. There was some blame. Um, you know, I remember a specific instance when I was not traveling for a short period of time, where we lived a quarter of a mile from the bus stop, and it was spritzing out, and Lori decided that she wanted to drive her to the bus stop, and I took issue with it. I basically said, if she can't, it was 60 or 70 degrees out or whatever it was, if she can't just use an umbrella or a, or a or a rain jacket and manage to walk to the bus stop on her own, how is she going to deal with adversity in general? It was kind of a sign to me that didn't strike me right. And Lori was like, hey, I'm home, I'm available. And so I have the opportunity to do it, and I want to do it. And so there was, I think she held some resentment about me not being as present, and then second guessing her. And then I definitely had resentment about her not being firmer. The kids would nag her to death, and she'd relent eventually, or just be more tolerant than I would be. And we needed to forgive each other and get beyond that and get more aligned. And I also think there was a grieving process with Audrey's situation. There's a poem that you may be familiar with, or your listeners or can Google it. It's called "Welcome to Holland." Have you ever heard of that?
No, we haven't.
Okay, so it's basically a parable, and it's basically about a family that has planned a vacation and is traveling to Italy and is really excited about the culture and the food, and going to the Vatican and going to see the Leaning Tower of Pisa and everything relating to Italy that makes it so unique. So they get all ready, and they have all their guidebooks and all their clothes and everything to go, and they get on the plane and they land in Holland. And what they do is they rue the fact that their journey, or the trajectory of where they thought they would be, had changed abruptly. And they made the decision that, hey, we're disappointed, but Holland has a lot to offer. It has tulips, it has windmills, it has, Amsterdam, it has all these great things that you could take advantage of if you change your perspective. And so what we learned through that, amongst other discussions, was that, every family and every kid's journey is different, and it doesn't take the exact path that you expect. And once we were able to accept that and realize that Audrey would find independence and happiness as long as we were better aligned as parents, given the therapy that she had received, we were going to be okay. And that made a big difference in terms of how we proceeded and moved forward, for sure.
I think that's a really key point, because a lot of parents out there, they hold themselves to these expectations, that it should be a certain way. And when it isn't a certain way, then, they put all of that heaviness on their own shoulders. We had a child who had attention deficit, and, the educational system was
Yep.
not in agreement with him whatsoever.
They cater to the mean. Yeah.
Correct. Right. And he is very successful now, working as a legislative director for a congressman on Capitol Hill. So, it's a matter of really understanding your child, trusting your instinct and your gut, and helping your child to be the best that they can be, and not hold them to expectations that society or the educational system holds them to.
Right. And you asked, if I may, about what can parents do. Kay, Jean asked about what parents can do when they don't have resources or information, and how to figure this all out in a way to learn from us. And I mean, the reason we put that podcast together was because we realized that people were Googling and getting sales pitches and slanted information, and not really able to hear from somebody who had been through it. And so that made a big difference. And then, my coaching business, Parents Journey Coaching, has really been about trying to help parents who, in the best scenario, are realizing that they could have a problem and want to address it, like a 13-year-old who's defiant, who doesn't listen to people in class, at school or at home, and is nasty. And they realize that if we don't do something better as parents, our kid is going to have trouble by the time he's 16, and we want to do something now. Or we have, I deal with parents who are much, who are in crisis, whose kids, drug use, breaking the law, really struggling in other different ways where they need help. And it gets more complicated nowadays with single parents and co-parenting, not just married parents, blended families, all the rest. And so what I try and do is I try and work with those parents, no matter what the situation is, to make sure that the parents get aligned much sooner. It doesn't have to be, two parents with different parenting styles, parenting in different ways, and then disagreeing in front of the kids and then not following through on certain things. It's really about compromising and communicating in advance and presenting a unified front and then following through. And it's also empowering the kids. So as an example, if a lot of people have trouble with social media and the phones and all the rest, and parents can just be tough and set rules, but a better way to do it, a more successful way, is to involve the kids in the process and actually give them an opportunity to say, if I don't get my homework done, what's a reasonable consequence? The parents get to make the decision whether it's reasonable or not. The parents can chime in, but you're actually giving them a sense of control because they're making the choice. And then they're making the choice whether they're going to adhere to it or not. You can't force a kid to adhere to a rule. You can't force anybody to do anything, but you can set the consequences. And when people are, when you involve your kids in the process that way, you feel like they've been heard, and then they make better choices as a result. And so rather than trying to figure out the alignment process reactively, doing so proactively makes a big difference.
I kind of chuckle inside because we have a clinic in the Chicagoland area that we've been running for the past 20 years. And the trends that we have been seeing with families coming in is majority of the parents can't even hold themselves to their own consequences and boundaries. And, they can't even get themselves off of social media. And so we have these kids coming in and the parents are like, fix my kid, to our therapist. And then we have to send the kid back to the same environment where the parents aren't even following, the house rules themselves.
Yeah. If you can't do that, that's kind of 101. It's do not pass go. Right. So, so part of, and sometimes I'm asked to bring the kid into the meetings, and I basically have said, I will do that as a family unit, but not until you guys are fully aligned and you guys are doing your part. Right. And so, a lot of parent coaching really is about implementation and adjusting and having some new approaches. Coaching is different than therapy. Therapy is diagnosing. Coaching is really furthering the education and the actions. So it's creating an action plan and helping to educate people. And so that's why I've embraced the coaching element of it. And
that's why we moved into coaching too.
Yeah. And I've developed a framework. I call it the 4A framework. And it's really about assessing and addressing and acting and then adjusting.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't have that cycle where you can make those adjustments and what I call bump into the world, allow your kid to actually
Mm-hmm.
experience some stress. I actually heard something today on a podcast where a woman was saying that in France there are actually no kids menus, and the reason is because they want kids to actually have to figure out what to order rather than just be catered to in a kid's way kind of thing. And it was symptomatic of, allowing a kid to be frustrated. It's okay. It's okay to allow a kid to be unhappy, and parents aren't responsible for their kids' happiness all the time. And so,
They shouldn't be. That's
no,
for sure.
they shouldn't be. Yeah,
Because the world won't modify for them when they get older.
that's right. I mean, and
You know,
all you're
one of
trying
the
to do is you want your kids to be independent and happy, and they've got to be able to bounce back from failure. And if they're protected all their childhoods,
Yep.
it's much harder.
One of the things that we talk about in a lot of our podcast episodes and everything is that the general public is not aware of how the counseling field is really not educated and not certified to work with families and with couples. The research shows that marriage counseling has the worst success rate across the board of all therapies combined. And there is no needed certification to call yourself a marriage counselor. There's no needed certification to call yourself a family therapist either. And if we look at the majority of therapists out there that say they do family therapy or work with children, I would be willing to bet that the majority of them don't even have kids themselves and are coming straight out of school and are young and really don't have that kind of life experience to be able to work with a child or even work with the adults and help them parent.
Yeah, they to their credit, people who are like that at least have a passion and want to help, and there aren't enough people in the field to help people with the growing mental health crisis.
For
But
sure.
it's clear that if you have credentials, if you have experience, it certainly makes a greater difference. What I hang my hat on, frankly, is that I have a kid who had mental illness and still
Mhm.
does. I received parent coaching, so I benefited from it and know what the benefit is.
Mhm.
I'm certified by 2 different national organizations to be a parent coach, and I've had really good success, 4.9 out of 5 on my Google reviews. And then I'm a guy, and so quite often the first call's from the mom, but, I always ask, "Will the dad be involved?" And I'd say 3 out of 10 times they're, like, willing, but 7 out of 10 times they're not. Either they're too busy, they're too wrapped up in themselves, they don't wanna be vulnerable,
Yep.
and I'm able to kinda break through some of that frequently, either through sports or business or just kinda understanding how, a lot of guys are not quite as empathetic as they need to be with their kids, and I wasn't at the time either. So, it's allowed me to be effective and impactful at what I do, and it's why I enjoy it so much.
Mhm.
One of the things that, as we're talking, is becoming evident to me, and we've noticed this in our work, is that when we're working with a couple and we're working with them an hour a week and, get them homework and stuff, it is nothing compared to when they come on our weekend, which is unplugged. It's out in the wilderness, very similar to, what you guys were explaining that your daughter went through. And I think that's a component of being human that we have kind of, I think that's a big part of our mental health crisis. We're not designed to sit in classrooms for 8 hours or, work on things for an hour. If you want to learn any sport, you don't do it for an hour a week. And oftentimes you go to camps for, 2 weeks at a time where you're really diving in and really shifting things up. And maybe that is just how it's supposed to be, and that we really need that. And someone like your daughter, who's more sensitive possibly than some other people, really needed it.
Mhm.
And, that's what we always felt about our son. He was never going to fit in the box. And we just tried to keep his self-esteem in a place that said, one day you're the kind of person that is going to change the world because you don't fit in that box.
Yeah.
And instead of, like you were talking about, like diagnosing everything and calling everything an issue, maybe it is about growing and developing and learning and becoming. And that's true whether you're a child, whether you're new parents, whether you're a couple newly married or 30 years married, there's always more to learn and grow. And I think we've gotten this idea like, okay, I finished school, so I'm done. And I know everything. And, our brains develop, everything continues to develop. And so I don't think the system as it is could be enough. And we've noticed that as well. Like, we're just not reaching people enough, which is why we created the weekend. But that those like trying to weave it into the rest of your life is not maybe organic enough. I don't know what the right word is. What do you guys think about that concept?
I think it's hard to argue with what you've said. I mean, studies have shown time and again that people out in the wilderness are happier because they're connecting outside. And I think COVID and social media have done damage, big damage.
For sure.
COVID with kids' development because they were being isolated, and they also had learning deficits as a result of, learning in a different way or not learning at all. And then social media, I've given presentations on social media, and I don't have it in front of me, but the amount of time that kids, since COVID happened, the kids are online, that they're online surfing as opposed to doing something productive, has just like doubled or tripled. It's skyrocketed. And parents' concern has skyrocketed. But for the most part, parents haven't really addressed the issue properly, partially because they don't know how to, because it's so compelling, partially because the algorithms are meant to hook people, and they do, partially because they can't relinquish the social media themselves. And even the government really hasn't stepped in. You can be, decide how pro-government you want to be in terms of stepping into this kind of thing, but it's been allowed to get out of hand, and kids have suffered as a result of it.
Probably all of us.
Yep.
I think another component is community. There's
Or lack thereof.
The lack of community. And when I was a kid, it was like go out and play, and now it's like go to your organized cheerleading event or your organized hockey thing or your organized this. There's an adult everywhere and cameras everywhere. And that lack of go figure it out with the kid next to you is kind of gone. And every parent on the block is going to be allowed to correct you if you were wrong. So we don't have that anymore. And we're designed to live in those communities. And so the community's gone. And I think we try to fill it with social media that is a very dangerous substitute.
I totally agree.
Not to mention those organized sports cost thousands of dollars, and the expectations that people are putting on their kids now to be these pro athletes at such a young age, it's just too much for kids to handle. So, we've, I'm sorry,
to get a scholarship to college, right? So
yes,
parents
right.
won't have as much of an expense or whatever, or the kid. Yeah.
Yeah. And some parents that I work with, their kids are struggling and have not made it through high school, or still in school and struggling, and may not go to high school and may not go to college. Our daughter, we pulled her out when she was a senior in high school. It was the worst time ever, but it was the right time. And
she still graduated.
Yeah. She finished remotely, but there are a lot of parents who are like, my son needs to finish high school and then go to college because that's what we do. And I'm like, maybe that's your path. That might not be what's appropriate for him. Let's find out what makes him happy and find out, if he wants, sometimes what happens is kids get so anxious that everything becomes overwhelming. So an example, I have one client with a child who's 25, who's at home, who's having trouble launching. And he has a job and he goes to the gym, but he's generally introverted and doesn't have any friends and all the rest. But he wants to move away from the country and into the city. And rather than just talking with the son about, well, what are you going to do? You said you wanted to move by year end. What are you doing? Time's a wasting. The approach is more like chunking it down. We call it in parent coaching, chunking it down and clustering so you can make it simpler. It's like, are you still interested in moving to the city? We know it's a big deal to do that. What are some of the first things you may want to do as you're trying to move the ball forward, and how can we help?
Mhm.
And what you're doing is you're making it easier to have the discussion, and you're asking permission. And your conversations are a lot different when that approach happens. And most people don't do that. They want to get the kid out of the house. They're disappointed that they have a 25-year-old kid who's at home who hasn't, who's not a lawyer yet, or a doctor or something else. And they have their own, they may be slower to the take, and they may not be a doctor or a lawyer, but they could be very successful in their own right.
Lori, I want to ask you a question about that little rain incident that he brought up. And I think it's a really common one where there's this need and desire to mother, and the difficulty of setting things that make our kids uncomfortable. Has that been part of your journey as you're growing, and what you went through with your daughter?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first, I'd like to clarify that it was a thunderstorm. It wasn't a drizzle. So as the sky turned black outside, I drove up the street to pick her up so she wasn't walking home in a thunderstorm. But all that to say, yes, it has been. I mean, I don't know if it's just the kind of kid that she was, or whether it was me trying to act a certain way because of the childhood I had, or maybe both. But yeah, that was sort of my MO in many ways. But sometimes there were, at one point he was upset with me because I would drive her to school sometimes as opposed to having her take the bus. And I was like, I like having time to talk to her in the car. Like, it was the only time I would have during the day where there was no interruption from anybody else. And we could sit in the car on the ride to school, which was 10 plus minutes, and talk about something. And I really liked that. But he didn't want me to do that, or he felt that I was babying her by doing that. But it wasn't really about babying her. It was about getting time with her. And she liked it too. So sometimes there's more to the story than just, babying your child by doing things like picking them up at the bus stop or driving them to school. But
I think the lesson to be learned here, looking back, if I can make a point, is just that we would point at each other at that time when we were going through things. We don't do that anymore. We learned to kind of talk things through, not having an agenda other than trying to connect. And we would have had a different tone and being able to communicate better and figure that kind of stuff out. And we do that now. Our
and
kids,
I think that's where we all are.
You're always a parent.
Yeah.
Mhm.
You're always a parent. They call it parenting, not childing, for a reason. And and so we're having to deal with situations now. Our Audrey wants Audrey, there's certain things that she wants from us now that we're not inclined to give to her, and we have to make sure that we talk it through and that we communicate in a unified front. And we've done that, and she knows not to come back because she knows that we're resolute.
Have you guys heard of a book called The Art of Loving by Eric Fromm?
I have. Yeah.
And he talks about the archetype of the mother and the archetype of the father, which of course we have both. But the mother is the unconditional love. I'm going to feed you whether you're a brat or not. I'm just going to take care of you. And the masculine, or the father, is conditional love. You get this and you get the reward and the discipline and the training, and how much we need both of those things. And it is he calls it the art of loving, because it's an art form that you have to practice and you have to master and you have to learn. And I think that we do such a good job of developing our intellect through our school system, but not so much our ability to relate as adults with each other and as parents to children. And, it's like we're over bloated in the intellectual world and facts and information and all the stuff we learn there and how to make money and have a job, but not this whole art form of loving and being in it for real. And, you guys, your story has been very inspirational because it's real and we see it. And often it doesn't end like this. It often ends with divorce and the kids in the system somewhere, or struggling, or whatever it is. And, even though she's 25, is that how old she is?
23.
She's 23.
It's you're not done. We don't live in a world where we're done at 18 anymore. and that, when I moved out of the house at 17, but my car insurance was $100 a year. You could afford to do stuff like that, where now it's almost impossible
Yeah.
to even be financially independent, let alone emotionally or mentally at a place where you can live in this world independently very young.
Yeah, I mean, how can anybody afford a house nowadays in their 20s with the interest rates and with
Oh, yeah.
the price
Mhm.
escalation and the lack of housing stock and apartment rents being so expensive? It's I feel for younger people who are trying to
Hmm.
establish their careers
Mhm.
and frankly invest in real estate so that they can build up some equity and have some pride in that.
There are still adults that are still struggling with that and can't teach their kids how to do that and how to thrive in this environment as well. So, it is a growing trend, a scary growing trend.
Yeah.
So what would you guys say to some parents that are out there that are in the earlier stages of dealing with knowing that their kid's in trouble? What advice would you give to them, or what would you say to them?
I would say take some of the lesson, don't make some of the mistakes that we made, take some of the lessons that we've had. And if you can learn and implement them on your own through trial and error or through emulating others, more power to you. You'll be better off than we were. And if you feel like you're struggling and really can't get over that hump, invest in a parent coach. It's for the amount of money to have family harmony and to change the trajectory of the way your family operates. There's really no price on that. And whether it's me or someone else, I'm based here in Atlanta. I work in person in Atlanta, but remote anywhere. I've got some clients outside of the country. Um, Look me up and my website's parentsjourneycoaching.net, and people can sign up for a free discovery session where if I can be of any help, regardless of whether we work together, I'm more than willing to have a conversation to help people, because that's why I got into this. I didn't get into this I was an entrepreneur before. If I was still trying to make top dollar, I'd be doing something else.
For sure. How about you, Lori?
I would say that it's really important, obviously, to make sure that your relationship with your spouse is also getting help, not just the help you're trying to provide your child. It was something that we didn't work that hard on until she was in treatment and it was part of our program. We didn't really identify that as well as we could have younger, or gotten the kind of help that we should have. I don't know how much it's impossible to say how much it would have changed the trajectory, but I think having placing effort into the work that you need to do with your spouse is equally as important as the help that you're trying to get your child if you're starting to see trouble with your kid, or your kid is starting to spiral. Because I think that it helps on both fronts to have both of them.
Yeah. And some of it's relating to being aligned and getting that parent coaching, but some of it's even more basic. Like a lot of the parents that I work with, managing their careers and talking about their kids nonstop and trying to figure stuff out represents 100% of their lives. So they're not a couple. When they
Right.
go out for dinner, what do you do? We go out for dinner. What do you do? We talk about our kids being in trouble, right? So it's how are you supposed to connect and build that foundation to even be aligned parents if you don't have a connection yourself, because you're going through that stage in your life where you've kind of lost your connection. So it's making sure that you have those date nights or have those time just alone where you can just enjoy each other's company or do something fun together, and make sure it's about the couple, not about the kids all the time.
I think it's a very important point. We tell all our couples who are parents that you are the cornerstone of the family. If you guys aren't strong, the family is not going to be supported.
So that actually brings us perfectly to our last question. What is it that your partner does that they love you?
I would say shows an interest in the things that are important to me, even if they're not important to him, or even to go further than that he really doesn't care about, but he knows I do. So when he takes the time to really want to hear about something that's important to me, I know that's one way that I know that he really loves me.
And I'll echo the same. I mean, we've come a long way when it comes to that, but it's actually, it's actually anticipating the other person's needs and desires because that's important to them, even if it's not important to you, and willing to make that effort. There are things in our lives, in our households, that we have different preferences and little sticking points, and rather than pointing fingers at each other and saying that's not something that's important to me, so I'm not doing it, if you want to do it, it's actually doing it because it makes the other person happy. And we both have careers, and we both have friends, and we both have emotions, and we're able to share that with each other without judgment, without and we listen to each other.
And even like encouraging you, like he's going off to do something that's important to him for a long weekend because it's an interest that he has that I really don't have. And I'm like, go have a good time, enjoy yourself. I'll go away with my sorority sisters from college. I mean, I've been out of college for 1,000 years, right? We'll have get-togethers, and he'll be like, go have the best time, go. I think encouraging each other also to have your own interests and to live life in ways sometimes that don't include your partner is also important for the relationship.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yeah, my mother is 82 and in good health, thank goodness. And she's had peers whose spouses have died, and their whole life is around. It was centered around the spouse. They never did anything without each other, and then they're totally lost.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not healthy.
No.
True.
Andy and Lori, thank you so much for being on our podcast today. We're definitely going to put links, to the website on our show notes. But can you also remind our viewers or listeners about the podcast that you guys have and host?
Sure. It's it's called The Wilderness Journey and Residential. No, The Wilderness Treatment and Residential.
No.
It's been a little while. Wilderness Therapy and Residential Treatment Journey Podcast. Wilderness Therapy and Residential Treatment Journey Podcast. You can find it on Spotify, Apple, wherever you find it. And for people who are entering that ecosystem or in the middle of that ecosystem, have exited that ecosystem, it's valuable information where there's a voice. And you can find out about all the things that Lori referenced: insurance, how to pay for this stuff. It's so expensive.
Imagine.
Transportation, educational consultants, and all the rest. And I want to make an announcement. I am starting a new podcast called Winning Parenting.
Oh,
and
all right.
It's going to be focused on things that I have learned and have implemented in my parent coaching practice that I think will be more specifically inspirational to parents, and a lot of the things that we, touched on differently today. And so I was actually just drafting the first episode, which is kind of the trailer. So that it'll be called Winning Parents, and the first episode or the trailer will probably be available within the next week, which would be long before this, would be ahead of when this episode may be published.
Yeah. Well,
right.
You heard it here, and we will definitely put the link to that new podcast in the show notes as well. Well, thank you so much for being on the podcast, guys.
People have been
you.
sharing their stories since the beginning of time to bond, heal, and grow. And we hope that by you guys sharing your story, it's enriched your lives and the lives of our listeners.
Absolutely.
We appreciate your time too.
That's why we showed up. We when our daughter went away, and we gave her the gift that we didn't say that our daughter was, we weren't quiet about it. We didn't, we were transparent and honest about what we went through, and it's been helpful for us to share our story and also, help people along the way. So we appreciate you for giving us a platform to do that, and for all the good work that you do. And thanks for your time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I want to thank all of you for joining us today on Couples Synergy. Our passion is in helping people and couples have happy and healthy relationships, and this podcast gives us a fun way of bringing our knowledge and expertise to you, our listeners. For all of you listening, please let us know how you enjoyed the show. If you have any questions, comments, or topic suggestions, please email us at contact@couplesynergy.com. For more information about Couple Synergy and our programs such as Relationship 101, the home study course, the Couples Relationship Enhancement Weekend, and our premier coaching program called Couple to Couple, look us up online at couplesynergy.com.
And if you know someone who could benefit from this episode, please download it and share it. And thank you for listening.
Until next time, synergize your life and synergize your love.
You have been listening to Couple Synergy with Dr. Ray and Jean Ketkodian. Couple Synergy was recorded, edited, and produced by Dr. Ray and Jean Ketkodian. Voiceover and music entitled Breathe and Let Go was recorded and composed by Gina Gonzalez.